Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Phil, I feel like we should do a thing like other shows do, where when I introduce you, you go hi, so people know that like you're there.
Hello.
because then I have to continue rambling for 3 more minutes, and people are like, didn't he say there was someone else there with him? And then I just start, apropos of nothing, talking to a person who is apparently there. So now you all know.
Greetings, Internet people. I'm here.
Phil is here.
Connor, you may continue.
Thank you. Please shut up, Phil. I'm trying to talk. I'm trying to do the intro. Today, we are coming to you to talk pretty much exclusively about next week's UFC card. We are coming fresh off of, boy, what an event it was. It looked like a bad card beforehand. Robert Whittaker was stricken with a very surprising hernia the day of the fight, and so the main event was scrapped, making a very weak card even weaker, capped off only by, I will say, a surprisingly engaging and dramatic main event between Israel Adesanya and Anderson Silva, but there really wasn't a whole lot there, and even a lot of people who watched that fight didn't really enjoy it or appreciate it in the same way that I did. So we're going to talk about that one on a bonus episode this week. You want to head over to the Heavy Hands Patreon. You can hear our recap of Silva Adesanya. Again, I want to say it was a good fight. I feel like I have some good things to say about it. But this week, we're going to be looking forward exclusively to next week's UFC on ESPN card, Ngannou versus Velasquez. Cain Velasquez returning to competition after, boy and howdy, how long has it been, Phil? Let's see. He fought Travis Brown back in July of 2016. So it's been nearly 3 years, a few months shy of 3 years since Cain Velasquez's last appearance in the cage. Lots and lots of injuries in between. Huge layoff for a guy whose career has already been stricken by so many of them. And he's taking on Francis Ngannou, who just recently won his momentum back in a performance that told us essentially nothing about whether or not he can become a consistent, high-performing, well-rounded mixed martial artist. That's the main event. We're also going to look at, let's see, James Vick versus Paul Felder in the co-main. We've got Courtney Casey versus Cynthia Calvillo. We have Vicente Luque versus Brian Barberena. I think Phil and I are both excited for that one. Sounds like a damn scrap. And on the prelims, Jimmie Rivera versus Jemaine Sterling. This is, Phil, far and away a superior card to last week's. You even said before, if you just took the prelims of this card and compared them to the entirety of last week's card, are they not a little better? And our answer was, yeah, kind of is. It's good. It's a good thing. I'm happy about this. I'm done shitting on last week's card. I'm excited about this lineup. It looks like we'll have a lot of good fights.
We are talking, pretty much top to bottom. Every fight has some measure of intrigue to it, whether it's a kind of, is this guy done kind of intrigue, or how do these two huge lightweights match up, or like, has Vicente Luque fixed the problems in his game, or, who's really going to be the next bantamweight contender? There's lots of like interesting questions to ask here. And most of the fights are just really well matched and compelling and have people that we know and care about in them.
Yeah, and you've been very busily pointing out like the importance of matchup variety on our cards recently. But look at this one. I mean, like, Ngannou Velasquez is going to look nothing like Caceres Gracie, or which I think we're going to talk about that as well. By the way, Alex Caceres versus Kron Gracie, or Vicente Luque Brian Barberena, or Andre Fili Miles Jury. These are all very different types of fights, but all of them sound compelling. So, yeah, no reason to complain whatsoever. Why don't we jump right into the main event then? Ngannou versus Velasquez. Thoughts, Phil? I mean, where's Cain Velasquez at right now? I think that's the main topic for us to prognosticate over. Where is Cain Velasquez really at now, almost 3 years after his last fight?
Yeah, so I touched on this kind of off last week. And I'm going to stick by my assertion which I made back then, which is that Cain Velasquez is a shell of himself and is going to get destroyed.
And why do you say that?
Two things. One of them is that GIF that you've probably seen going around of like the time lapse of Cain over the years.
Yes. That was going around before his last fight, too. Remember that? 3 years ago, I saw that GIF.
Right. There's that one. And
should we explain to people what the image is? It's essentially a sequence of clips of Velasquez like before the fights, right? Showing him doing these little jump squat warm up.
Yeah, so he's doing his jump squat warm ups, and it's over the course of however many years in his UFC career. And at the start, he's just bouncing around like an Energizer bunny,
insanely athletic.
Clearly just like ready to go. And then I think it's the Verdum fight is the last one, and in the other ones, he goes down into a squat and then leaps up. And this one, he goes down into a squat and then it's just like, oh. And then just
I guess I'm fighting like this now.
Clambers back to his feet. Like he's,
get a handhold on his own knee. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I shouldn't laugh. This is a man's body falling apart before our eyes.
And the second thing is that the Nevada State Athletic Commission failed to approve Velasquez to fight back in UFC 207 in 2016. And I'd like people to think about just what that means. When any athletic commission looks at someone and says, oh, yeah, sorry, guy, you're not stepping in there. Because, this last weekend we had Kelvin Gastelum with staph and ringworm sores exploding all over his body, getting ready to step in there to fight Robert Whittaker. We have had Big
CM
Nog,
Punk got licensed. Big Nog got
he got licensed while he was made of jerky and blind in one eye. And people looked at him as he staggered towards the cage and thought, or wherever they do this thing, and thought, yep, he's good.
This man is 90% teriyaki jerky and juicy fruit chewing gum holding him together. Yeah, essentially, Cain Velasquez was in such dire condition that a commission was forced to do its job, which really should tell you something. Yeah, I agree. So here's the troubling thing, Phil. Cain is shot. We have seen him, even when he wasn't shot, lose in the fashion I assume you're expecting him to lose here to Junior Dos Santos. In their first fight, that 64-second knockout heard around the world. But we also saw, in the two matchups after that, what a terribly brutal style matchup Cain Velasquez is for that kind of fighter. And you have to agree that anything closer to his prime, Velasquez, while still susceptible to that first-round shock knockout, would be kind of a terrible matchup for Francis Ngannou.
Yep.
Like a brutally hard matchup for Ngannou. Like all the shit Stipe did to him, but more intensely and with more punishment.
So, I don't think he's an awful matchup for Ngannou, even in his prime, because his defense is so bad. I mean, because Ngannou proved that if you're someone who has to come forward against him, he's eminently capable of just picking up big shots on you as you kind of change levels and rush in. He proved that against Blades when he fought him the second time. This was still a reasonable matchup for him. Like he was still, because Blades had to close the distance. What Stipe was able to do is that Stipe is a much more well-rounded fighter than either of those guys. He was able to draw shots out from Ngannou and then close in behind them. And even then, it's notable that Stipe got hurt in the first round. So I mean, it's always a style matchup where Ngannou is going to have his opportunities to land. I just think those opportunities will be greater against Velasquez because his defense is so comparably bad compared to Stipe's. And yeah, I'm just not sure if like Velasquez can lock up with and take Ngannou down in the same way that he used to. I mean, there was some footage of them, like I think it was released by AKA of Cain training. I think it was a couple of months ago, and he looked dire.
Oh, I didn't see this.
Did you see this?
No, was it
this
like
was him?
Like on a scale of healthy Cain Velasquez to Chuck Liddell, to current Chuck Liddell, how terribly slow and bad did he look?
I mean, it was the fact that it was kickboxing and it was really bad kickboxing. And that his team clearly thought that this was awesome. Partly so it was just incredibly awkward, slow head movement, kind of just wiggling his head around and getting himself hideously out of position whilst hitting pads. It was sort of more Rousey than it was Shamrock, if that's any consolation at all.
Cain has always been a little bit of a... I mean, that's a perfect parallel between the heavyweight division and women's bantamweight, isn't it? He was always kind of a Rousey in a lot of ways. Maybe a little more heart and determination than Rousey, if we're being really honest, to fight through adversity. But he still had to run into a lot of adversity because he would just kind of run after people. Yeah, it's rough, man. Like, look at Francis Ngannou. Is he ever going to be more than this? Will it ever matter? You know, like...
Yeah.
I don't know. So you're thinking of an early Francis Ngannou knockout?
Yeah, I think it's going to look really, really sad.
I do want to say this. Yeah, we don't know a lot, and we have very good reason to suspect that Velasquez's wrestling, which was always the primary element that made him so dominant and successful, is not going to be as like athletically effective as it once was. Changing levels is hard when both of your knees are made of paper clips. But compared to Stipe, I do think that Velasquez has always had a wrestling style or a focus in his wrestling that it works particularly well against big, gigantic opponents. Velasquez is well known as a master of the single leg. Very good with his foot sweeps and his trips. Basically, all of his takedowns force a fighter like Francis Ngannou. Once he gets in on they require him to get in only on one leg to start with. He loves the single leg entry. And we know, the reason that Randy Couture went for that on James Toney in their famous world-renowned fight is that it's easier to get in on a single leg. There's a reason that Jose Aldo's takedown defense always consisted of him allowing his opponent to take the single leg because they were kind of going to get it anyway, and his defense was based on working out of that position. Velasquez's whole offensive wrestling game is largely either getting to the clinch or working to a single leg and forcing his big, heavy opponent to balance, which is exhausting. And just harder and harder to do the bigger you get. So, there are still elements here. I'm even if Velasquez is shot, if he just doesn't get knocked out in the first 2 minutes and manages to get in on a single, I don't see Ngannou having the type of wrestling defense to respond to that. Ngannou is like an explosive scrambler. He doesn't let you settle into positions. He uses his strength to stop you from ripping his hips out from under him. But when it comes to, single leg, the style of takedowns that Cain pushes force Ngannou to deal with his own frame. They don't force him to battle strength for strength with his opponent. They force him to contend with, gravity. So I can see Velasquez having a fucking field day with those takedowns and just Ngannou being exhausted after one round of having to try to stop a few and not succeeding. And then, of course, we have to acknowledge that even a shot Velasquez is likely to be significantly more punishing from top position than Stipe Miocic ever has been. Stipe's had some good ground and pound performances, but there's a particular kind of volume. Although, countering myself again, Stipe was not able to put forth any volume at all against Ngannou because he had to put every ounce of his energy into holding him down. So I don't know. Where does it equal out? Here's a question. This will compare to this slightly. Would you pick Derek Lewis to beat Cain Velasquez right now?
Maybe.
Because there's a lot in common between Lewis and Ngannou. I mean, Lewis is patently the better fighter, as we saw when they fought. But
it's just that Ngannou is he's a counterpuncher who tends to just want to lean out of the way and clock people with hooks and uppercuts, right? So if someone's going to just fence with him from range, he's just going to sit there. Whereas Lewis is a guy who's just going to kind of stand there and get drawn into whatever fight the other guy wants him to, whilst being upset about it.
Yeah. And so you think just Ngannou's patience...
He's like, Ngannou is a fundamentally, like, I would never, ever pick Lewis to beat Curtis Blades, for example.
Right. Yeah, nor would I.
But Ngannou is able to capitalize on the level changes and the step-ins and so on. But yeah, I mean, you're right. And the thing is that Velasquez is, like, I don't want to put Velasquez down too much, because I actually do really like Cain Velasquez. I really enjoy his game.
Yeah.
Like, this is a bit of a sadness hedge pick from me, that I just can't bring myself to believe that he's going to be in any way, shape, or form physically there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, because a lot of his game is about leveraging his physical advantages, namely his cardio and work rate, because he's a very efficient and annoying wrestler.
Yeah.
There's very little which is high amplitude in what Cain goes for. You know, he doesn't go for big slams or picturesque double legs. It's all just constantly dragging and just using that giant head to pin people up against the cage.
Perfect heavyweight wrestling. I mean, it works perfectly for his opponents. I might pick Cain here, just on sort of a flyer. Like, I don't know, man. I still don't trust Ngannou very much. And the thing is we trusted his patience and composure to be his saving grace against Stipe. And they were not.
I didn't.
Well, okay, fair enough. Some of us made very bad picks for that fight, but did you not expect him to be more patient and composed than he was? Because he went nuts the moment that fight began. I think there was a lot more on the line there. It was a title fight, so maybe he won't come in here like, "Ooh, I have to prove it. I'm going to knock this guy out immediately." But I don't know. He seems like kind of a head case.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you know what I'm going to compare this to is, for a potential Cain win?
Yeah.
Teruto Ishihara against Gray Maynard. Like, Gray Maynard might have been incredibly physically shot, but he was up against someone who wasn't very good at all.
Right.
And someone who had a singular gift for landing counter shots, but was still just, like, not capable of going... not particularly capable of going 3 hard rounds against a well-trained, even heavily declined wrestler.
That's kind of what I'm feeling here, because like there's no denying. I know you agree with me on this. Ngannou's skill set, as far as we've seen, is still incredibly shallow. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think I'm picking Velasquez because, that Maynard Ishihara is a very good comparison. That's exactly what I'm feeling. Is like, I just don't think Velasquez's game is, to borrow one of your favorite words, Phil, granular enough to favor him consistently coming up with the right responses to lots of pressure and having to defend lots and lots and lots of particularly exhausting takedowns. But also, Cain Velasquez is an automaton made of old refuse. So, there's no reason to trust him. Don't bet on this fight. I know we don't talk about betting much on this show, but do not bet on this fight. Please. Save your money. It's not worth it. It's heavyweight, and it's two of the most unpredictable, wildly volatile, yet dangerous heavyweights out there. So, but you're sticking with Ngannou for your pick, Phil. First round knockout, I presume.
Yep, sadness hedge all the way, baby.
All right. May your emotions survive to see a brighter day. And that brings a close to segment 1. Ngannou Velasquez, an interesting, somewhat depressing, but no doubt compelling main event. But unlike last week's card, as I've already noted, this one is not just a main event waiting to be taken away from us. And let's be real, it could be taken away from us. This is Cain Velasquez we're talking about. There's still a week to go at present before this fight actually happens, so it may not happen. Fortunately for us, the undercard, as I noted before, is very strong. After this, we are going to return and talk to you about Vic versus Felder, Casey versus Calvillo, Caceres versus Gracie, Luque versus Barberena, and Jimmie Rivera versus Aljamain Sterling after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
You just be silent for the first half of this segment while you search for that video.
No, just keep going. I'm going to search for it whilst we're talking.
That's what I mean. Just be distracted. It'll be fine. All right. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're moving on through this UFC on ESPN card. Ngannou versus Velasquez, the co-main event, a lightweight battle between two men who probably shouldn't be lightweights, James Vick and Paul Felder. Why is James Vick still a lightweight? I mean, even more so than Paul Felder. When you think after that Gaethje fight, you'd be like, you know what? I'm huge. If being this much bigger than all my opponents isn't causing me to win fights and I'm still just getting flatlined like this, maybe size is not my biggest problem. Maybe I should feel a little better and have a brain surrounded by fluid when I fight. But no, we're persisting in this 155-pound quest. Does this upset you as much as it unreasonably upsets me, Phil?
Are you saying there's some kind of precedent for super giant lightweights going up to welterweight and doing well? Like, for example, that guy that you don't like and didn't pick to win, Tony Martin.
No, there's certainly no precedent. No. I guess
he really needs to get out of there. Like, I'm kind of waiting in a freak show kind of way for the first yoked 6'4" lightweight. Because I can still remember the days when people used to complain that lightweights in the UFC were too small.
Oh yeah.
And
go on.
At the moment, there's a solid, I think there's a competition. It's basically either Vic or new contender for the freakish giant man titan and at lightweight role, Jalen Turner.
Oh yeah.
Both 6'3", not actually all that skinny.
Turner's even more fucking bricked up than Vic.
Right? When do we get a 6'4" bricked up lightweight?
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming.
But yeah, either one of them, get the fuck out of there.
Can I just complain about this for a moment? Getting sidetracked. We have a really weird perception in the MMA world of size. We're all of our divisions are bigger than the ones in boxing. A lightweight in boxing is 20 pounds lighter than a lightweight in MMA, and he almost certainly cuts about half as much weight, which means he's really about 30 pounds lighter than a lightweight, a modern lightweight in MMA. Why is it that we call the division lightweight that is an average-sized man, whereas welterweight in boxing is 147? Is smaller than I don't understand this. So this whole idea that flyweights are tiny. Flyweights are the same size as fucking Marco Antonio Barrera, Eric Morales, Juan Manuel Marquez, and Manny Pacquiao in their fucking heydays. That's boxing's featherweight division. And it's incredibly historically exciting. So get over it. They're not actually that small. Our heavyweights in MMA are huge. They're gargantuan. They shouldn't be fighting. They're bad at it. So just get rid of the heavyweights, rename all the other divisions. So 205 is the new heavyweight division, and everything will be better. Anyway, there's my ambitious plan for improving weight-related PR. Yes, James Vick, Paul Felder, a freakishly large lightweight in James Vick. The style matchup here, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Vic has made real leaps and bounds in his outboxing, his long range striking. His footwork is improved, not to the extent that a fighter like Justin Gaethje can't run him into the fence, but to the extent that he can actually pivot and sidestep off of his jab. He uses his jab. He uses his long linear kicks quite well. Defensively, still sort of a blank slate, but he has really grown as a rangy striker and can rack up damage And yeah, like has really shown some power in his hands as well, setting up really precise kill shots. And Paul Felder, by comparison, tends to be a little more plodding, a little more. Phil, did you just cause a Skype sound?
I may have done.
To get recorded on the. I don't know why those sounds are actually turned on. Apologies for that. But you know what I'm saying. Paul Felder is kind of a plodder. Good kicks and everything, but tends to sort of patiently walk his opponents down. I can see James Vick having a lot of success, just keeping his long strikes going. I don't know if Felder's capable of putting the kind of pressure on him that at least the Gaethje fight would suggest is sort of necessary to comfortably outstrike Vick at this point in his career.
Yeah, I tend to agree. So I think we might have touched on this before, but I think the main thing to ask about Paul Felder is he a liar? Has he tried to trick people in order to get more, presumably, more money and fame for himself? Because Paul Felder sells himself as a striker. I am entirely unconvinced that Paul Felder is a striker.
He's like a Leon Edwards, secret grappler.
Leon Edwards is a better striker than Paul Felder, though.
Yeah.
Paul Felder doesn't win striking battles with people.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. He has a couple of notches that might put him over Edwards in some categories, but in terms of overall efficacy, like having a wider array of strikes, as we well know on this show, just having a larger pool of a longer move list, basically, does not necessarily make you a better striker. And yeah, you're right. He does have a much harder time. He can't exhibit the kind of control that Edwards gets over striking battles. He sort of always ends up fighting his opponent's fight when he strikes with them.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you can look at Edwards and you can say, here are the best parts of his game. For example, he has an excellent long southpaw 1-2. What is the best part of Paul Felder's striking game? Because the most reliable thing he tends to do is do a spinning back fist and sometimes break his arm.
Yeah, he's good at a lot of things. He's certainly not a bad striker. He does have nice counters. He's got good counter right hand. He's got really good standing elbows. Really tricky, does a great job of sort of finagling them in using his hand fighting from range.
But this is the thing. I feel like he is a clinch fighter and a sneaky top position grappler who is disguising himself as a striker.
He's very clearly more dominant.
Not very comfortable there.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I suspect the basic dynamic of this is, he had problems chasing down Francisco Trinaldo. Francisco Trinaldo had a lot of problems chasing down James Vick.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think James Vick is just going to land his jab a lot. He'll throw a lot of, front kicks and general kind of poking kick volume from range and circle off and throw the jab, and Felder will plod after him and scowl. And I think we're pretty much in for a 30-27.
What happens if Felder takes him down and doesn't get guillotined? Do you think he could out-grapple Vick?
I think he could.
He might be able to, right?
He's a really underrated... I mean, this is one of the things, is why people think he's a striker. He's a really underrated grappler.
Mm-hmm.
Just in terms of his just positional ability. He's very good at taking the back. He's obviously really effective from top. I mean, he's one of those guys who, he's a bit like Scott Holtzman further down the card, mm-hmm. is that he's both more than and less than the sum of his parts.
He's very...
I think he could really hurt Vick, but then, it's also hard to think of anyone who's actually really been able to get any significant takedown game going on Vick.
Yeah, a couple have. Let me think. Let me look through his record real quick. As I recall, it's been a while. That's the thing. I want to say Glyco França had some real success taking Vick down early. I want to say Nick Hine had some real success. It's been a while, though. That's the thing. In his recent fights. But then again, he hasn't really fought many good wrestlers.
I think Michael Chiesa, didn't he didn't he finish him from top position?
Yeah, was that a tough fight?
Yeah, it was a tough fight. So it doesn't really mean a lot, but there you go. And it was a long-ass time ago.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is he hasn't fought a lot of very good top position grapplers. And none of the ones he has fought have pushed for that. Like Dariush and Gaethje were the strongest, and they both knocked him the fuck out on the feet, which Felder seems a little less likely to do. So I'm with you. Like, I think Felder, it's a question of how much does Felder think he's the grappler? Because he did go in there and start grappling with Charles Oliveira. He did it comfortably and knocked him the fuck out. And I think Vic could really be susceptible to the same kind of treatment. Felder, I think his game works on the ground. Like you said, there's a strange thing where despite his striking credentials, he seems more comfortable in the clinch, and all of his best strikes seem to be ones that are almost clinch strikes, if not outright clinch strikes, where he's touching his opponent. He's a very conscientious fighter, even when he's striking at range. He's like defensively aware. He tries to adjust to everything that's shown to him. Oftentimes, I think that's his problem. Why you read him as being uncomfortable on the feet. He's constantly fretting about what his opponents are trying to do to him to the detriment of his own momentum. That he's not actually building an attack of his own or setting his opponent up. Hopefully you can hear these cats killing each other in the background, by the way. But on the ground, he's equally conscientious. Against Oliveira, like, he was really defensively aware, and it just worked for him better, I guess because he was on top of and physically controlling his opponent. So it was just easier for him to keep his momentum moving forward, to keep building while still reacting to every single hole the opponent tried to poke in his defense. So like, yeah, I can see him. I'm not sure how good Vic is from his back. He's got some guillotines, but he's not really like a guard submission machine. He's got the limbs for it, but he's also a little chinny, capable of being bullied.
I mean, I think the other thing is that Felder is just extremely plodding.
Yes.
Like, so I just don't. Whilst he's good in the clinch and better at taking people down than he's given credit for, he's also just like, how does he close Vic down? And I don't really see it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
How he actually gets into significant clinch exchanges.
I'm with you there. My caveat would be Vic's overwhelming tendency to back himself into the fence anytime the right amount of pressure is applied. So like, it wouldn't take much for Felder to go in there and get the opportunities to take Vic down or tie him up in the clinch and start beating him. Like, the clinch would be really valuable as well. We saw how badly Dariush fucked Vic up in the clinch. He is not your idea of a comfortable, competent, tall man clinch fighter like we would usually expect. But yeah, we've laid out the reasons that I'm picking Vic here. Cause I agree. I just don't think Felder has every round starts on the feet, and I don't think his striking style is well suited to corral and drag Vic into his game. And in the meantime, he's going to be eating lots of jabs, lots of kicks. I think Vic is going to be able to slow Felder down because Felder he allows that to happen. He's so aware of his opponent's attacks, that he just slows his own pace down further and further the more aggressive they are off the back foot. So James, Vic it is.
Yep.
All right. Let's talk about the women's strawweights. We'll run through these next few relatively quickly. We've got Courtney Casey taking on Cynthia Calvillo. This one strikes me as an interesting test of Cynthia Calvillo's takedown entries, because Courtney Casey is not a very good wrestler, to say the least. She has abysmally bad takedown defense. She is like Paul Felder. In many ways, a female Paul Felder is Courtney Casey, except that she's not actually that good at grappling. She's okay at it. She's all right. She's had her moments. But tends to be kind of a plodder. Throws big, stiff power punches, although more and more these days in combination. It's a fight that Calvillo could lose if she agrees to strike with Casey, because Calvillo is decidedly less potent with all of her strikes. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think it's whilst Casey doesn't have any resemblance to Esparza, I think it's definitely a referendum on how much Calvillo has improved since that loss to Esparza.
Right.
Because that was definitely her just getting pulled into a veterans fight and not really knowing how to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, Casey is sort of like a less exciting female Condit in that she can be taken down by whoever wants to, but she's going to constantly scramble and constantly work her way back to her feet, and is just constantly going to be attacking from every single position, which isn't a bad skill set. I mean, just being
it's kind of
incredibly tough.
That's kind of one of the first things you look for when you're like scouting the efficacy of a prospect. You're like, is he or she crazy aggressive and tough? And yeah, a lot of times like just being really feisty is enough to get a lot of wins.
So, but in the end, I feel like Casey's weaknesses have been too adequately shown for like this is somewhat of an IQ test fight. Calvillo has to know all she has to do is hang tough and compete on the feet for long enough to hit takedowns and control Casey without getting just battered from the bottom, like for example Jessica Aguilar did. And you know, it's one of these fights where the game plan has been laid out. And what's some of the bloom is off the rose for Calvillo. And you know, it's becoming increasingly apparent. She's 31 years old. She's not, an A-list prospect in this division anymore, if she ever was. You know, there's in a division with Tatiana Suarez in it, you can't make your way as kind of a top position wrestle grappler if someone younger, bigger, stronger, and better at your core skill sets is out there. But yeah, I think in general, whilst she does occasionally fall in love with her hands just a bit too much for my liking, it's just the fact that she can hit control positions on Casey, and that she's just pretty tough. She was clearly upset and losing in that Esparza fight, but she wasn't ever really in any significant trouble.
No,
means I think it'll be hard for Casey to just like scare her off that much. And the other thing is that Casey is huge and clearly has a size advantage in this fight, but she had a huge size advantage over Michelle Waterson and just kind of got out techniqued.
Yeah, I think she's actually susceptible to that size advantage being used against her because she's kind of slow and clumsy in comparison to a lot of the strawweights. And say what you will for Calvillo's striking and her tendency to rely on it too much, but she does have a lot of the good, like fundamental, I don't even want to call them techniques, the fundamental ideas you want to see in striking, namely that she uses her jab, she's active, and she's mobile. She moves, maybe not super well or super technically, but she stays moving between her strikes. She is happy to sort of run around an opponent and rack up points and set them up. So, do you think it's a shame to be like a female Carlos Condit and just look at the long run that Carlos Condit's original style enjoyed in the men's divisions, and then just be like, but I haven't been here that long, like the game's already passing this style by. Women's MMA is just progressing so much faster with the model of men's MMA to imitate. It's a shame.
Well, it's also just that like it's much, much harder to knock people out at this weight class.
True.
Condit made his way by having an insanely high finish rate.
True. Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm taking Calvillo. I think it'll be a decision, very possibly a submission.
Yeah, I mean, Casey's been in there with some pretty good submission grapplers. I think she'll get put into bad positions, but she always fights her way out. I think it'll be a lot of fun, but yeah, Calvillo by decision.
All right. Well, let's take another break. And when we come back, we're going to get into the rest of the fights from this card. As promised before, we're looking at Caceres versus Crone Gracie making his UFC debut off a pair of impressive but sort of difficult to gauge wins in Ryzen. Vicente Luque fighting Brian Barberena in a secret banger that a lot of people may not be, I don't know. Luque's gaining some traction. Barberena feels like he's been gone for a little while, but these are two consistently exciting and very hard-working fighters. And then Jimmie Rivera versus Aljamain Sterling, like a really genuine bantamweight contenders fight. Bantamweight fucking rules! So we're going to get into all of that after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word.
We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Yeah. Oh, no, I don't mind Reddit when I see it. There's just certain obvious threads to stay away from.
Yes. I'm just saying it feels worse than it was a couple of years ago. But you were getting some love on there. I want to try and find this comment. At least Phil picked Aldo. His reasoning was even spot on. The body shot helped Aldo find both the opening and the finish. Phil, I'll never doubt you again. Phil is usually more accurate. And someone said, can confirm, I've been tracking their picks since the second half of last year. Phil is currently at 71% accuracy. Connor's 55%.
Booyah.
Out of the plus 10 publications I check for predictions, Phil has one of the best track records, especially considering he's usually making picks for the entire fight card, only being beat out by MMA Junkie staff picks.
Yeah, because those are main card only.
Yep.
And thus.
Yep. I think my percentage is much better if you factor in my full card picks from the Vivi. I tend to fall flat on the main card when there are stakes.
Also, it's just that, like, even over, like, long periods, the idea of what corresponds to, like, the thing is that a lot of the time when we make, I was always thinking about, like, doing an article about this when I can be asked, is that, like, what corresponds a good pick is so often just informed by internal biases rather than by, like, when you pick something crazy out of the left field, like, a lot of the time you personally will, like, feel like, wow, I'm amazing, I really picked that. But it'll just be because, like, a lot of the time it'll just be because you have a specific bias for, like, how this person fights and performs. Like my bias is just for, like, you know, like, Zane's bias is for, like, either weird, janky people or athletes, and your one is for blue-collar people, and mine is for anyone who does a jab, and Pat's was for beach muscles, and, like... But
Pat just picked based on the hotness.
Yeah. So yeah, like, and, like, over a period of time, it's possible to be like, wow, this person's making really good picks. But then, like, how many of those were actually good? I mean, how much was it just, like, history lined up with your biases for just, like, for a short amount of time?
It's true. We can't include this, however, on the episode because, you know, online, Phil, people aren't allowed to have biases. The ideal man has no biases somehow.
Yes.
He's freed himself from, you know, opinions and feelings. And
aside from the way that everything is biases.
Yeah.
And it's biases all the way down.
I just want to destigmatize bias.
Yeah.
You're going to be biased. You can't avoid it. So just understand your biases. That's all.
Yep.
Do what you can. All right. Well, I'm going to include that because I feel like you got some nice words there from the Reddit. And I do want to I'm sort of a masochist, so I want people to know how bad my record has been.
Excellent.
And that way it'll be an even bigger underdog comeback story when Cain Velasquez defeats Francis Ngannou. Against all odds. I'm essentially
by beaching hot. Prove both of us fucking wrong.
Cain sprays Ngannou in the face with his blowhole and then suffocates him. Yeah, it's gonna be great.
And then majestically leaps over Javier Vasquez like Free Willy.
He leaps over Ngannou and just lands on him, breaks him in half. The mighty orca. Yeah, okay. All right. Let's get back in. We'll finish up this card. You ready to go?
Yeah, that's it.
All right. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are still talking about Ngannou versus Velasquez, namely its undercard. And we're moving on. I guess we'll do these chronologically, but let's be honest, Phil. Jimmie Rivera versus Aljamain Sterling is the big fight of these. Do we just want to hit that one first?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. It's the most relevant, I think, one of the more exciting matchups. Also, two dudes coming off of getting head kicked into the shadow realm by Marlon Moraes. Very similar losses in their last fights, so I don't know. That probably has something to do with why they were matched together. Knowing the UFC matchmakers and their weird sense of humor.
Didn't Aljo turn it around after this win over Cody Stamen?
Oh, yeah. Did that happen after the Moraes head kick? It did.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, there was the Brett Johns win in there, too.
Oh, Brett Johns as well, yeah.
That's right. Jimmie Rivera just fought Moraes later and then beat John Dodson. Both of these guys have had wins since then. And that was a good performance against John Dodson, just as Sterling's performances against Stamen and Johns were very strong. So, getting these guys are a nice reminder that getting just brutally deaded by Marlon Moraes is not an indictment on the entirety of your skill set. Both these guys still at the top of their games. What do you make of this style matchup? It's an interesting one because Rivera is maybe Rivera compares most favorably among previous Sterling opponents to like Rafael Assunção, sort of patient, doesn't really push too much of a pace, but a really technical striker who has very stout defensive wrestling. And that was a problem for Sterling. I think this might be a real test of like how well Sterling can make his range striking, his relatively newly honed range striking skills work against a short-armed but more experienced and in many ways more technical and more dangerous striker, and how well he can leverage those skills into creating takedown opportunities. It's going to be, I think, a real test of how far Sterling has come as a fighter, because I think historically this would be a really tough style matchup for him.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was thinking as well. This is in terms of the matchups in the bantamweight division. It's sort of weird that we never got Assunção Rivera because they've both been thrown up against a ton of common opponents, and they have a lot of similarities in how they fight. Assunção tends to favor the big right hand. Rivera is much more of a kind of left hook heavy guy. But yeah, both, like you said, just both very stout. Rivera obviously a bit more of a kicker as well. I think it's going to look pretty similar, which means probably very, very close.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Sterling has improved markedly in any ways that would have an impact on that matchup? Like, has he grown to face that kind of matchup better this time around?
It's hard to say. I think what we've seen from him since that fight against Assunção is that he's gotten much better at integrating his takedowns into his striking. I don't think his striking's particularly improved much, but he's definitely he had a period in his career where he was pretty much just kind of kickboxing with people, as in the Assunção fight. And then, since then, he's had more performances like he did against Cody Stamen, where he's been able to mix up his striking and kickboxing a bit more. And it is worth pointing out that Assunção Sterling fight was incredibly close.
Yes.
I mean, I think I scored it 30-29 for Sterling because I could not find much in the first two rounds. It was just Sterling kind of tenderizing Assunção with kick volume, but then just periodically getting cracked with a big right hand.
Mm-hmm. It was an Assunção fight.
Yep. Much like Assunção's fight against Marlon Moraes, or at least his first one.
Much like pretty much all of his fights. Very, very Assunção. Yeah, it's tough to call because Assunção was, as I said, a tough matchup for Sterling. Like, he had a really hard time getting headway because just having stout defensive wrestling, not leaving a lot of openings for someone to time a shot, and still being comfortable putting on pressure. I think Rivera might be a little more comfortable pressuring than Assunção even.
Yeah.
Those are all things.
So in terms of common opponents, if you want someone who's just gonna kind of pot shot from range, it's probably John Dodson for Jimmie Rivera. Has no physical resemblance to Aljamain Sterling.
Yeah,
but in terms of the distance he wants to fight at, whereas it's a distance that Aljamain Sterling covers with reach, it's a distance that Dodson covers with kind of exploding over the distance.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it was a better win than Sun Tzu's over Sterling. And it was like his win over Dodson was really clear, I thought.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm really not sure who to pick in this one.
Right.
I'm going back and forth.
My question on how much Sterling has improved. Like, I do think he's gotten more comfortable and confident in his striking. The techniques are still real shaky. He does a lot of overextending, a lot of taking his eyes off his opponent when he evades punches, a lot of really wide looping shots. He's got a little too much of like the Dominic Cruz without the same relative build and athleticism I think that Cruz often had over his opponents. But the comfort has improved. Like, going back to the Augusto Mendez fight, given an opponent who is essentially just a bull, Sterling was able to effectively play Matador, which is not something he was really doing in his career up to that point. He wasn't like stinging opponents, rolling under their counters and then countering them back before dancing away. But he's doing these things effectively against, Augusto Mendez. And then when it comes to fighting like a pretty well put together fighter like Cody Stamann, there's not nearly as much striking offense. I don't think I trust Rivera to slow down. I mean, Rivera does slow down. There's no denying that. He's really most effective in the first round, and I think due to a combination of stamina, because he tends to throw everything pretty hard. I think he wears himself out just trying to knock people out and rip their legs apart with his shots. And a lot of tense defensive movement as well, like hair trigger defense, similar to Jose Aldo, that can freak you out and tire you out really quickly if you're not careful. Those things in combination with the fact that he just doesn't mind, like a Sun Tzu just doesn't mind a slower pace and is happy to win like less impressively if he feels the fight is under his control. But given that Dodson fight and how consistent Rivera stayed throughout with, like, I think he recognized that Dodson, unlike his fight with, say, Uriah Faber, where his opponent was clearly diminished with each passing round and he was able to take his foot off the gas, he stayed pretty consistent against Dodson. He seemed to know that against an opponent this athletic, this quick, this potentially dangerous, he had to continue racking up points throughout the fight because anything could happen. And I imagine that against Sterling, he will either have him in a position where he feels he's controlled or will be comfortable enough with the technical and power disparity to like face down a couple of risky situations and beat him up a little when it matters. So like my gut is saying Rivera. I just think he's got a little bit more of the fightiness necessary not to give up the same exact kind of close decision as a Sun Tzu against Sterling. And Sterling would have to do a lot more work than he did against a Sun Tzu to win that fight if, say, a Sun Tzu had been more aggressive.
Yeah, I tend to agree. So, yeah, Rivera tends to punch in combination more than Assunção does, or certainly more than Assunção did in that fight.
Yeah,
and has much more of a tendency to mix up his targets, whether he's either punching to the body or kicking to the legs, which means that unlike Assunção, he won't be sort of giving the attritional game to Sterling.
Right.
And he's just a bit meaner. To go all intangibles. He's just a bit meaner in the pocket. He's just a bit less likely to like back out and concede range, and just a bit more likely to say, no, this is my exchange and we're not leaving until I've won it, kind of thing. I mean, I think I tend to favor him. I think Sterling still has that ability to just turn the whole fight around with either a round or the fight itself around with a single grappling exchange. He's still one of the most dynamic grapplers in any division. But we haven't really seen Jimmie Rivera give up takedowns to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, I think we're in for a close, well-contested kickboxing match, but yeah, maybe just Rivera's combinations, his comfort and kind of aggression in the pocket, just maybe what makes the difference in a fight where, I mean, Sterling lost that Assunção fight.
Mm-hmm. He lost and it was close, but if Cynthia had like a chip on his shoulder and wasn't like one of the nicest guys in the sport, maybe it would have been won a lot more convincingly.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, both of us going with Jimmie Rivera there. Expecting a good fight. Maybe kind of slow pace, but really interesting. I love watching both of these guys perform. So looking forward to that one. Let's jump back to the main card now and finish off with these last two. We're looking at a featherweight matchup real quickly here. We don't know a lot about Kron Gracie yet, but he is making his UFC debut here, carrying on the Gracie legacy against Alex Caceres. And what a difficult fight it is to call based on who both of these people are. Because what would you, let's start things off. I mean, we know Alex Caceres is insanely unreliable. He is his own worst enemy in a litany of increasingly unpredictable ways. You just don't know what's going to set him off or how something is going to collapse. At his best, he's genuinely a very good fighter, but he is not at his best about 80% of the time when he's in the cage. And the rest of the time it's just a grab bag. So all that's known. We understand that about Alex Caceres. We know who he is. Who is Kron Gracie as a fighter? That's the question. What does his style look like? How does he match up against only Caceres, but how does his version of the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu game match up against modern MMA in general? It's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, so, I mean, Kron Gracie has a 4-fight MMA career.
Yeah.
Which is not really something you should be looking for against someone like Alex Caceres, who has fought pretty much his entire career in the UFC since 2011.
Yep.
And what we've seen from Kron in his fights is mostly very, very good and exactly what you'd want to see. Mm-hmm. Is that he's been relatively disciplined. He's shown like a lot of physical power in there. He's shown durability, and he's been up against really tough competition. For someone 4 fights into their career to get Tatsuya Kawajiri as a grappler, no less, and to beat him by submission is immensely impressive.
Yeah, Tokoro and Kawajiri both well past their best, but these are within the first 4 fights of his pro career. So they're still very credible wins at this point.
Yep. So I mean, but other than that, it's very difficult to say because the people that he's gotten are also fighters who are going to give him the kind of fights he wants. Mm-hmm. So Hideo Tokoro, who we've talked about on a bonus episode, and Kawajiri, these are a grappler. Like, Tokoro is just all over the shop and will take whatever fight you give him, like a much more fragile Alex Caceres, and Kawajiri is just really strong but incredibly slow. If you want to grapple with him, you can.
Yeah.
So the question is really, can Kron cover the distance against Alex Caceres without getting fucked up?
Yeah. And then the other question, of course, pairing with that, because it is Alex Caceres, is how Hideo Tokoro is he going to be in this fight? Is he going to try to maintain the distance? You have to assume he will. And if he does, I would definitely favor him to win. A significantly more experienced opponent, which doesn't just mean like, obviously the amount of craft that Caceres is able to apply at any given time is sort of up in the wind, it's up in the air. It's always confusing to watch him like select his techniques and be like, what is affecting your thought process right now? But experience matters for things like having to fight through a tough spot in a fight. Kron Gracie's never been like knocked down and had to come back to continue fighting to either win or lose a tough loss. These things add up. And Caceres has a lot of that kind of really valuable experience. Kron has none.
I'm sorry. It was just like, as you were saying that, I was thinking, Alex Caceres has been knocked down 500 times. And you're like, he's got a lot of this valuable experience. And I was like, yes, he really has been knocked down a lot.
But seriously though, like in a matchup like this, getting your ass kicked and knowing you can survive it is valuable. Caceres has a lot of that experience. And Gracie has none of it. And if Caceres just accidentally fights the right way, if he just moves his feet and uses his build, I have not seen anything from Kron Gracie thus far to suggest that he has any kind of nuanced way of closing the distance. He's determined to do it, and that might be enough. But like it seems like an eminently winnable fight for me, for Caceres. And it also seems like one that it'd be a real indictment of him if he can't select the right approach for this opponent. Because you're fighting a Gracie, dude. Like, we figured this one out a long time ago. Just don't let him grapple, and you're almost certainly going to win.
Yeah, so I'm basically going to pick for Caceres to do a wheel kick and then get his back taken into a naked choke. That is exactly what I'm picking.
I hope you are exactly
changing
right.
my pick.
Yeah. For those who heard us at the start of this segment extolling Phil's great accuracy in making fight picks, just when this exact thing happens, I want you all to send him, all of you slide into Phil's DMs and just congratulate him, because it's very likely that you're right. I'm going to pick Caceres, though. I just can't I can't justify picking Gracie at this point. I need to see him do it, and this is a huge step up, not only in terms of like current relevance. I mean, I don't know if Kawajiri is that far below Caceres, but in terms of the kind of style he's given. Like, no matter how experienced Kawajiri is, you put it, if you want to wrestle with him, you can. I would put it that even if you don't want to wrestle with him, you probably will. So like, Kron Gracie didn't really have to make too many tough decisions to get the fight that his style necessitated against Kawajiri. Maybe he won't against Caceres either, but there's a bigger chance that Caceres has the option to do something much, much harder. All right. I'm taking Caceres. Phil's taking Kron. Let's move on. Our last fight of this card that we're going to break down. Welterweights, Vicente Luque, Brian Barberena. Phil, this is why I asked you to join this show after the illustrious Dr. Patrick Wyman left, because for moments like this, when we were looking over this card last week, we were like, okay, let's look ahead real quick before we hang up, figure out what we're going to be talking about. We both, I think, our eyes fell on this matchup at the same time. I said Vicente Luque versus Brian Barberena, and you went, oh yeah. And that's why I love you, Phil, because this is an exciting matchup. It's maybe the most exciting matchup in this card. It is almost guaranteed to be a scrappy back and forth fight. And I feel like a lot of fight fans wouldn't appreciate that. They would look at a lot of other names before they looked at these two. But you and I, God damn it, we know where the meat is when it comes to these cards. What do you like so much about Luque versus Barberena?
Well, I mean, firstly, it is a bit of a puzzling one, because you've just got to be like, what the fuck does Vicente Luque have to do in the welterweight division to get some kind of marquee matchups?
Yeah.
I mean, and I suspect the answer is you have to beat Brian Barberena, because this was sort of the way forward for Colby Covington and Leon Edwards.
Uh-huh.
And what makes this one awesome and interesting is that it is seemingly designed to test Vicente Luque in exactly the ways in which he's been tested before.
Mm-hmm. It's a can you pass it this time kind of fight.
Yep. Because he is an incredible dynamic finisher. I mean, every one of his UFC wins, if I'm not mistaken, has been a finish in one way or another, and I think they've all been in either the first or the second round.
You are correct.
So he is just an annihilating force in there. Mm-hmm. He is incredibly athletic. I mean, this was why we saw Jalen Turner last week go from fighting him to a regional Aussie grappler with all the prediction, and both those fights were about as predictable as they possibly could have been.
Uh-huh.
Because a UFC debutant cannot beat Vicente Luque, because he's just going to rip their head off. So
it's not like Turner didn't try his best to rip Luque's head off either. Luque absorbed some big shots and just walked through them to knock Turner dead. He may have, by the way, some of the heaviest hands relative to weight in the UFC right now. Luque he's a pretty ferociously hard puncher.
Yeah.
Like, who was it we were looking at recently? That's right. Early in his career, he knocked out Thiago Santos at middleweight. Now, kind of a chinny middleweight, but still, this man is now a welterweight. He has always been a really, really killer puncher. But the problems with his style that you expect Barberena to test. I mean, right? We have questions about Luque's gas tank. We have questions about his takedown defense. What else?
I mean, those are pretty much it. So, but there's also the question, like, Vicente Luque tends to just knock people the fuck out instantaneously, right? Yeah. And Brian Barberena is unlikely to get knocked out instantaneously.
Yep.
But it's also totally possible that he knocks Brian Barberena out instantaneously, because not only did he knock out Thiago Santos, who is kind of chinny, especially at middleweight, he knocked out Belal, remember the name, Muhammad?
Uh-huh.
He just completely waxed him.
Who we have now seen survive 2 historically brutal ass kickings while still fighting his ass off to win the fight. Like, that's a very tough man.
Yeah, and Luque just erased him.
Yep.
So, yeah, it essentially, it's a referendum on, A, can Luque just hit hard enough to knock almost anyone out? Or B is, like, can he actually stay on top of Barberena? Like, can he win rounds?
Yeah, and it's particularly tough because of the stamina, the takedown defense issues. Like, Barberena's not an amazing wrestler. He's not a super fast-paced fighter. But he's also very, very tough. And he is inexorable. He's a really difficult opponent for anyone who, like, at any moment in the fight finds himself wishing for a little more space or time to think or come up with their next move or just catch their breath. Barberena is the kind of fighter you don't want to be fighting. And he is also a representative of one of my favorite teams in the MMA world. Isn't Barberena is a lab fighter, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, part of where the dynamic comes from, right? This is and not to throw too much shade, this is the matchup between the Heart Gym and the No Heart Gym. Because Luque is ex-Black Zillions.
Yes.
He's a Henry Hooft fighter.
Yes. And Phil, you like to say, I mean, we were talking about our respective biases before, and, you know, I like my blue-collar fighters. I know you have a fondness for that kind of fighter as well, maybe not as poignantly as me, but I think we both like the MMA lab, right? Because you always used to say, and still do, that you judge a quality of a gym not based on its elite talent. You don't judge, for example, just a random example here, you don't judge Straight Blast Gym on Conor McGregor. You judge it on Artem Lobov. And, like, how much can they do with this comparatively dry and crumbly piece of clay? And MMA Lab is, by my reckoning, maybe one of the best gyms out there, because they have a lot of fighters who, athletically speaking, are sort of average, and they're all really good. Like, they all do their damnedest and come in well prepared with well-rounded skill sets. John Crouch has a way, he's a smart, understanding trainer and works with a lot of different types of fighters to create styles that work for them at the highest level, even when many of his students are not at the highest level. So Barberena kind of embodies that to me. Like, he is a smart fighter. He's tricky. He's got a nice complement of strikes. He sort of doubles down, but not recklessly. Like, I remember his fight with Leon Edwards, and he was trying his best to work his way into that matchup, but he wasn't just giving up openings and expecting himself to walk through everything. He started to slip and come back with counter combinations as that fight went on. As I recall, he dropped Edwards with an uppercut at some point.
Yep.
Had him pretty badly hurt. Like, this is a fighter who turns doggedness into something, elevates doggedness above the usual sort of blue collar scrappiness. I think he is a crafty, determined fighter. So it's like Luque is going to, if he does start to falter, if he can't get Barberena out of there, he's going to be dealing with a really well-rounded attack that is relentless, both because it's constantly happening, but also because everything is sort of playing off of everything else, because Barberena is in there thinking and calculating and determining, like, you know, I don't know how deep this thought process ever goes in the midst of a fight, but he is making his decisions based on what has happened previously in the fight and not just trying harder and harder and harder until he wins or gets knocked out.
Yep. So I think the question is, you know, how much does Luque try and lean on his grappling? Because this is an obvious two-edged sword. Much of what happened in his fight with Leon Edwards, which is, you know, his only relatively recent loss, was that Luque actually initiated a lot of the earlier grappling exchanges. Yeah. And Edwards was able to reverse them and then sort of start competing in the striking, and then started to realize, man, this guy's really tired. I can just shoot takedowns on this guy. And then shortly after that, he clearly thought, I can shoot takedowns on everyone I ever fight from now on.
Yes. We blame Luque for the change in Edwards' career.
I mean, he still had a fairly kickboxing based affair against Cowboy Cerrone. But so the question is, does Luque blow his gas tank by trying for takedowns against Barberena, and does that necessarily and does it actually work against him in a 3-round fight? In the end, I think I tend to favor Luque just because he is going to have a major advantage, presumably in the first round, because he will land big shots on Barberena and hurt him. Even if he doesn't take him out of there, I would imagine he's probably going to hurt him pretty bad in the first round. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I mean, he can hit takedowns too, and he can probably get ground positions. So the question is, do I think Luque is more likely to pick up 2 rounds and or a stoppage? Yeah, because Barberena, whilst he's incredibly tough and a really underrated puncher, his left hook and uppercut, both, he's got a lot of pop. Mm-hmm. And his choke series is pretty good as well. He's not really classically a finisher. Yeah. He's not he might look a bit like millennial Matt Brown, but he's not the level of finisher Matt Brown is, where he would just storm back into a fight he was losing and rip the other guy to pieces. Yep. So I think that even if Luque does end up, super gassed in a 3rd round with Barberena coming on strong, I'm not sure that Barberena can finish him, especially because Luque can still probably hit reactive takedowns on him in a way that he couldn't on, say, Edwards. Yeah,
I don't know if I really favor Luque to out-grapple Barberena, though. He's a really good finisher. He's sort of a little reckless and over-aggressive on the ground, though. A lot of his submissions, he's got the front headlock chokes. Those are a lot of them, in fact. Darces, anacondas. But I have also seen him, against Leon Edwards, giving up lots of bad positions, going for aggressive attacks on the ground, and not really being as cognizant. I think Barberena is a much more positionally savvy grappler. Or at least his focus on the ground is much more on maintaining good position.
Yeah, that's a fair take.
Yeah, but for all that, he is crafty and is capable of adjusting, what he's going to be adjusting to is very likely to be a gigantic Luque left hook in the first round, which means he'll be working from a deficit. And I don't know that I just don't really trust Barberena to have the horsepower. Whether it's finishing ability or even scoring clean takedowns of his own. If Luque goes in there knowing that he's trying to shut them down, I kind of expect Luque to win a striking battle here. Counterpunching. But it's also interesting, right? Barberena likes to pressure. Luque likes to pressure too. Barberena's going to put a lot more work rate on him than Leon Edwards did if Luque does start to slow down. And Luque might be like those Black Zillions fighters, catastrophically vulnerable to being bullied. So I think there's a chance for a really dramatic turnaround here. Even if Barberena is not a huge finisher, he just has the heart and determination to make the fight really ugly, even when he's clearly losing. And I don't know that I've ever seen Luque overcome something like that. So
yep, there's a big chance for a Elkins-Johnson dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think I agree. I'm taking Luque as well. He's going to be landing big shots early. He's just the more potent fighter. But I can. If I'd seen more of that classic Black Zillions shit out of him than just the Leon Edwards fight, I think I would be more comfortable picking Barberena here. But I haven't yet, so I'm taking Luque. And that does it for our coverage of this card. As we said at the top of the show, really good card. A lot of good fights, fun to discuss. Hope you guys enjoyed our breakdown of it all. And God, I'm praying that I picked all of the same fights as Phil correctly this week. I just mimic his pick. We differed on a couple, didn't we? Yeah. The one that I'm going to be wrong about. Velasquez and Ngannou. All right, so that's this week's episode of Heavy Hands. Before we wrap it up, let's tell you what you should spend your time looking at and doing when you're not listening to this show. First things first, before I plug our stuff, I want to plug a friend of the show, Kyle McLaughlin, who you may know from doing the sort of very erratic historical perspective series with me on the Heavy Hands Patreon. We'll be coming back with another episode of that soon, I assure you. He just wrote his I guess now let me think, 9th installment in the piece he's been doing for Boxing Monthly, a series, the top 10 bantamweights of all time. He wrote a great piece on Terry McGovern, who, if you recall all the things people were saying about Mike Tyson as a heavyweight in the 80s and 90s, people were saying very similar things about Terry McGovern as a bantamweight back in the, I want to say 20s. So you should check that out.
Terrible Terry McGovern.
Terrible Terry McGovern. So you should check that out. Kyle does very good work. Excellent boxing historian. If you want to read about one of the most ferocious and best regarded little fighters of all time, you should go check out that on Boxing Monthly. The top 10 bantamweights of all time. Number 2, Terry McGovern.
I fully co-sign on that. It is excellent. I haven't finished reading it myself, but I've enjoyed that series from Kyle a lot.
They're all very meaty pieces. So if you are looking for some long-form reading with a lot of interesting historical tidbits, and there's a lot. Kyle does great work with that. So make sure you check those out. Phil, what about you? Anything coming out this week?
I'm still working on it, but I'm trying to do a piece on how JDS and Cain destroyed each other.
Oh, that sounds great.
And so, looking back on how this was the sort of dawning of a bright new heavyweight era, and instead we got these two guys who just kind of smashed each other until they were broken, and how that leaves us in the modern tragic state of heavyweight.
All right. Sounds depressing and fascinating. And as for me, I have nothing planned as of yet, but I will be doing my best to put a piece out this week. It'll likely be connected to Ngannou versus Velasquez, that card, in some way. So just keep your eyes peeled. And when you're doing that, you should keep them glued as well to bloodyelbow.com, where you can find Phil's stuff and my stuff. And find us on Twitter as well, of course.
Oh, wait a minute. One more thing. I think I will also... So I normally do main event previews, so yeah, expect to see one for Velasquez Ngannou, but I believe myself and David will also be doing one for Michael Venom Page against Paul Daley.
Ah, yes.
A UK based fight between Paul Daley, who's one of welterweight's greatest action fighters, and Michael Venom Page, who is Luca Bourdon's favorite fighter, apart from Wonderboy.
Yeah, Luca Bourdon, who really knows his shit when it comes to kickboxing, rates Michael Page as the greatest kickboxing talent in MMA history. So, if you're into really technical kickboxing backed up by a really strong resume, then go check that fight out. And make sure you @ Luca Bourdon on Twitter to tell him how much you enjoyed it and how much you know he enjoyed it too. So yeah, that about does it for us. Find us on the social media. @BoxingBush, BUSCH, that is my handle on Twitter.com. You can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. Head over to the Heavy Hands Patreon for bonus episodes. Again, there will be an Anderson Silva Israel Adesanya breakdown happening there this week. We might find a little time to talk about MVP versus Paul Daley as well. And otherwise, we'll catch you guys next week. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.